John Adams, the second president of the USA, once said, "To nip the shoots of arbitrary power in the bud is the only maxim which can ever preserve the liberties of any people." Since then, 200 years have gone by, and presidents have appeared in 150 countries around the world. They have a lot of power, but is it really unlimited? In this episode of Simple Infographics, we'll discuss whether a president can really do whatever they want, what's within their rights, and what could send them to prison. The modern idea of presidency was born in the United States quite effectively. In 1789, George Washington became the first person of the country, winning 100% of the vote. He was re-elected 3 years later, also unanimously. He could have won a third term, but he declined to run again. This is how the Constitutional Convention came about. It states that the same person cannot serve as president for more than 2 terms, whether consecutive or not. This restriction is often found in other countries too. Nearly 60% of constitutions around the world contain this clause. That being said, presidents sometimes try to get around it by all means. According to experts, since 1875, almost a quarter of leaders around the world have tried to lift this restriction, and some of them succeeded. Various methods were used through referendum, an obedient parliament, changing the constitution, drawing up a new constitution, and even simply ignoring the restriction. For example, the president of the Republic of Chad, Idris Deby, remained in power for 31 years. With the help of a referendum, he abolished the limit which he himself had set, 2 5-year terms. Like him, President of Cameroon, Paul Biya, has not wanted to leave his post since 1982. He abolished the limit of 2 7-year terms thanks to the loyalty of his parliament. But not everyone is able to pull off something like that. The president of Burkina Faso, Blaise Compaoré, had to flee the country after trying to remove term limits after 27 years in power. This happens in Eastern Europe as well. The scheme is approximately the same throughout the region. At first, the president takes care of the succession of power when they become head of state. When their second term comes to an end, they look for a way to extend it. In addition to term limits, a president, or more accurately, a presidential candidate, must meet an age requirement. In the US, they must be at least 35 years old. In other countries, presidents are likely to be of a more mature age, sometimes even old age. The record for youngest person in the world was set in 1971, 19-year-old Jean-Claude Duvalier in Haiti, the oldest, Michael Aoun from Lebanon, who took up the post in 2016 at the age of 81. However, before that, he had been prime minister and acting president. The President of the United States must also be a citizen by birth, and they must also have lived in the country for at least 14 years. The vague language has created roadblocks for some presidential candidates. One of them was born on an American military base in the Panama Canal Zone. Another was born in Arizona when it was not yet an official state, and a third was born in Mexico. Today, another possibility is being considered, allowing foreign-born candidates who have become U.S. citizens to run for president, like Arnold Schwarzenegger. However, the original citizenship restriction is still in effect. In addition to that, restrictions are placed on presidential communications. Heads of state can't just pick up the phone and call each other. In fact, preparatory work is done by both parties before the call even takes place. If the two countries already have good diplomatic relations, the prep work is minimal. If the relations are not so warm, everything is planned in advance, down to the smallest detail. During a phone conversation, a president has the ability to look at a dossier of the person they're talking to, so they could, for example, ask about the health of their sick aunt. Of course, there's no real privacy. In the US, for example, members of the National Security Council listen in on the conversation. During a call, presidents are assisted by experienced translators who have numerous qualifications, including passing a polygraph. In most cases, this helps to avoid misunderstandings, like the one that happened with Jimmy Carter. During a diplomatic visit to Poland in his first year, he told the Poles that he had left the United States forever, called the Constitution ridiculous, and then expressed a desire to have an intimate relationship with them. Of course, the misunderstanding was resolved later, but the relationship between the two countries remained cool until the end of the Carter administration. As for telephone conversations, sometimes even presidents fall for practical jokes. In 2003, a radio host called then-president of Venezuela, Hugo Chavez. Then the host introduced himself as Cuban Prime Minister Fidel Castro, Chavez's closest ally, and then they played the same joke on Castro. Another limitation or advantage for US presidents is that they cannot refuse a salary. The current US president, Donald Trump, has been actively engaged in both politics and business in the past. His business dealings helped him to amass a considerable fortune, which Forbes estimates at $2.5 billion. So he voluntarily cut his presidential salary to $1 a year, donating the remaining $400,000 to various federal agencies. George Washington also refused his $25,000 salary once, but eventually agreed to accept it. For comparison, the salary of the president of South Africa is just over $273,000 a year, while the poorest president is that of Afghanistan with a $13,400 salary. Former presidents are not deprived of pension. Trump's predecessor Barack Obama receives $204,000 a year, while the former leader of Egypt, Hosni Mubarak, receives only $4,068. Going back to restrictions, the U.S. president does not have the power to dissolve the legislative body, that is Congress. However, congressmen can deprive him of power through the process of impeachment. 3 American presidents have faced this threat throughout history, but each of them managed to avoid having to resign. Congress also has the power to declare war, make peace, and impose a state of emergency, even though the president is the commander-in-chief. By the way, President Dwight Eisenhower was a general, but more than half of his presidential colleagues had a law degree. Among other things, a president can't make laws or dismiss certain senior officials. In other words, a congressional majority must support any major decisions in both domestic and foreign policy. In many countries, the president acts as a link between branches of government. But in addition to restrictions and great responsibility, there's a pleasant side to the presidency. This includes immunity from both civil and criminal liability. Former presidents in the US are stripped of their immunity upon leaving office, which is not the case in many other countries. But sometimes, if the crime is serious enough, not even lifelong immunity can save foreign leaders from prosecution. For example, the former president of France is scheduled to appear in court for corruption charges in fall 2020. One of the ex-presidents of Egypt was even less fortunate than that. He racked up several criminal charges and as a result received both a life sentence and a death sentence. However, the sentences were eventually canceled. And of course, there are many other similar examples. Another nice bonus for presidents is their plane. Leaders of countries are rarely seen on regular airliners, even in first class, because they have their own residence in the sky. The US president has Air Force One, a modified version of a Boeing passenger jet. President Reagan ordered 2 planes, one as a spare, but they didn't come into use until Bush was in office. Each of these airplanes is huge and can carry up to 500 passengers, but usually don't have more than 76 on board. The plane combines maximum comfort with maximum security. In the front of the plane, often referred to as the White House, there are official presidential rooms. There's also a guest room on board, presidential apartments, a medical facility with an operating table, a bathroom with a shower, and a working office. The US president can even hold a live broadcast mid-flight. The president of France's Airbus was recently upgraded for $240 million. It now has luxury apartments with showers, satellite connections, and internet. The cabin also has a conference room and an office. The presidential Airbus can accommodate up to 400 people. In Italy, top officials will rent a plane for long-distance flight. It has a civilian flight number instead of a military marking, and it has apartments and a working office. Even the Pope sometimes uses an Italian Air Force helicopter. All of this might seem like incredible luxury, but becoming president is an expensive endeavor in and of itself. In the US, a candidate must receive funds from their supporters unless they have their own resources. Trump raised over $30 million for his campaign in the first quarter of 2019. And here, we come to yet another type of presidential freedom: the duration of their campaign. In the US, presidents can campaign for as long as they want, but on average spend about a year and a half on the campaign trail. In other countries, the length of an election campaign is often set by law. Another thing that presidents can count on: the unspoken ban on discussing their health in the media. This is important because a leader's poor health can undermine the confidence of their constituents. When the president of Turkey fainted during a morning prayer at a mosque in the summer of 2007, witnesses panicked. The president later reassured his constituents, saying that it was just a minor issue with his blood pressure due to diabetes. Sometimes the press will violate this unspoken agreement while top officials themselves won't comment. This of course leaves room for speculation. The face of the presidency has certainly changed a lot over the past 200 years. There have been 27 amendments added to the US Constitution. In the rest of the world, 800 amendments to country documents have been made in the 21st century alone. The amendments to the US Constitution granted citizens freedom of speech, religion, the press, ended slavery, gave women the right to vote, changed the voting procedures in presidential elections, and much more. The US president can technically be a woman, but that hasn't happened yet. There have been several candidates for president in recent years, and Kamala Harris recently made history, becoming the first woman elected as vice president of the United States. In other countries, female leadership is nothing new. Now, in 2020, a woman holds the presidency of Slovakia. In recent years, members of the fairer sex have also been presidents in both Lithuania and Croatia. We end this episode on an interesting question: can the presidents of 2 different countries get married? Theoretically speaking, there's not a ban on this, but it's quite difficult to imagine this actually happening. Unlike presidents, there have been marriages between monarchs. For example, in the UK, Queen Victoria's husband Albert held the title of Prince Consort. This title means that the husband of the reigning queen does not claim to rule the country himself. These days, those at the highest ranks must gain security clearances to prove that they have the right to access state secrets, which would make married life extremely difficult. Then again, things are happening today that might have seemed impossible half a century ago. Who knows? Maybe in the not-too-distant future, two presidents will fall under each other's spell. What do you think? How limited are presidents in their freedom? Is the presidency worth such a sacrifice? Share your opinions in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and click on the bell to get notifications about new videos.